Hello, everyone, and welcome to P&P Live. My name is Brittany Kerfoot, and I am the events manager here at Politics and Prose. And we just want to thank all of you for spending your Saturday night in with us. We couldn't be happier to be bringing you Jen on her first digital event on the book tour. A couple of items just before we begin. We've been using this platform for a couple weeks. It's been great, but if there are any technical difficulties, just hang with us. We will get everything back up and running. But fingers crossed that everything goes well. You can click the green button below to purchase The Upside of Being Down straight from Politics and Prose's website. At any time during this event, you can click that and you get free shipping on all of our orders through April 15th. So grab a puzzle, grab a mug, grab all of your quarantine essentials, and of course, grab a copy of Jen's book. Also, just like all of our in-person events, you can ask a question tonight. It looks like someone has already submitted one, which is amazing. So feel free to ask a question anytime using the button below. It's just below the book buy button. And you can also upvote questions that you want Jen to answer. And this really helps Tyler, especially because she can look at which questions you guys are especially interested in and ask those questions first. So ask away. And also, unlike our in-person events, no one can see you. So feel free to be liberated in your comfy pants. You'll never know if I'm wearing sweatpants or real pants. I'll never tell. So don't worry, no one can see you. So feel free to get comfortable with no judgment. All right, on to tonight's event. Jen Gotch is the founder and chief creative officer of the beloved brand ban.do, but she's also an advocate for mental health, real self-care, and being honest about yourself, flaws and all. She speaks openly about her life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, on her Instagram and her podcast in order to fight the stigmas surrounding mental illness and help her followers feel at least just a little bit less alone. Her memoir, The Upside of Being Down, recounts how as a child, her struggles with bipolar disorder, anxiety, and ADD were misdiagnosed. From there, readers will learn about her winding career path as everything from a waitress and a photographer to a food stylist and finally, accidental entrepreneur. At its heart, this book just encourages us to embrace things that we think are our flaws and allow them to illuminate a path toward creativity and success, which I think is something in this time we could really all use right now. Moderating tonight's conversation is Tyler Calder, editorial and content lead at Girls Night In, a club that reimagines how we take care of ourselves to help the busy professional woman relax, recharge, and develop meaningful relationships within their communities. Since we're all forced to spend all of our nights in right now, we highly recommend you check them out at girlsnightinclub.com. So now, without further ado, the moment you've all been waiting for, it is my absolute pleasure to bring Jen Gotch and Tyler Calder onto your screens.
Yay, thank you for that intro.
We did it.
We did it. Jen, you wrote a whole book. A whole book. As you can tell, I have combed through so thoroughly. There's tags, there's marks, there's notes.
I love it.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
We're all very excited. I know a lot of people in my communities have been talking about this book coming out for a really long time. I've been excited for it. Do you want to jump in by telling us how this came to be and how you wrote a whole book?
How many hours do we have here?
No, we don't have anywhere to be.
Well, it ultimately came to be because someone asked me. My editor, Lauren Spiegel at Gallery Books, had actually been pursuing me for many years, unlike any man I know. She was like, I want you to write this book. And the time was never right for me. My role at ban.do was very hardy for a long time, but it was a dream of mine to write a book. I wanted to write either a business book because I thought I knew everything about business, which I've just found out this week I don't, or a self-help book. And Lauren really wanted me to write a memoir, and I felt like why would anyone want to know my life story? But I think I was able to sort of thread through the mental health piece and do the business piece and make a self-help book and talk about lots of other stuff. So I feel like we all got what we wanted.
And it was so good in the process. So thank you for sharing your stories throughout.
Yes.
I think it's one of your greatest strengths. I think it's why so many of us follow you and love doing so. I completely ate it up. And I'm sure that so many people are either doing that now or have already eaten it up this week, or, will eat it up in the days to come. What was it like actually sitting down to write a book? I mean, where does one even start? What does the process look like? How long did it take?
Yeah, so long. I was really awful at it for quite some time. When I signed the book deal, I said to my agent, what's the fastest anyone's ever written a book? And she's like, I think 9 months. And I'm like, I'm going to do it in 6. And I think all in, it probably took 1.5 years. It's funny because we shot the cover of the book October 2018, and I hadn't really written a word. So I was I was like, we better make this cover good because there may not be anything inside of it, and it'll just be a cute notebook for people. So it took me a really long time to just be able to flow out. I did a lot of sort of like looking back at my childhood and reading journals, but I feel like I'm a pretty good writer. The idea of the enormity of a book was really confronting for me. And so I eventually ended up hiring 2 different people throughout the process that you can hire, like a personal editor that really helps. I needed hand-holding, like I needed legitimate hand-holding, like I became a toddler. So I needed like accountability and one person to just be like, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. You can't say that's what she said 72 times in your book. So yeah, it was arduous, but also incredible and revelatory, and obviously we're not all going to get the chance to write a book, but I feel like so much of it was like journaling, and the lens it gave me on my experiences was worth all of it, to just like be able to look at these things and be like, oh, actually this maybe signifies something completely different than I thought, which I talked about some of that in the book. But yeah, it was a shit show. I don't know if I can say that. It was an S show. I think I'm only, I don't remember. I can't remember the rules. I'll be careful.
Were there any sort of like peaks and valleys throughout, or like moments you look back on and you were like, that's a lesson moment from the process of writing?
So many. I mean, there were times where I actually fell to my knees sobbing and praying, which is not really something I do. Asking for help is like not a strong suit of mine. And I found myself at several points throughout the writing process needing help and having to kind of navigate that, and also failing. I was like saying I don't know if I was saying it to my agent or but I just didn't get it right initially. I mean, I got there and I feel like with the help of editors and, it ended up being, I think, really good and apparently a very quick read. But I didn't do a good job at first. And failure was something that I really hadn't experienced in a long time, because I work at a job that I created, and that at this point is basically constructed around my strengths. Like I'm just at the point in my role there that I'm not asked to do anything that I'm not incredibly good at. And that was really interesting for me. But I'm a huge believer that failure creates strength and lessons. And so it was actually really healthy for me to fail in that way, because then when I actually got it right, it felt that much better.
That's really promising. And you did land somewhere beautiful, because, every page of this book that I read, I told you this already, but I read in your voice. It sounded like you. It reads like you. It kind of like jumps off the page the way that we have come to know of you through social and everywhere else. So
glad. I'm glad. I like to think that it's me just a little less tangential, which was part of my initial problem. I was like kind of writing really the way I talk, which is like, and so there were people that were able to shape that. And then my dad said to me, hi, Dad. Hi, Mom. My dad said to me, it's so good how you do the stories and it all makes sense. And I was like, oh, someone else helped me with that. That was absolutely, if that were left in my hands, everyone would have gotten to like page 7 and been like, I don't know what's happening here. So yeah, but yeah, in the end it worked out.
You provided the stories. They helped a little with the patchwork. You talked about this photo shoot, October 2018, which is wild. It looks so good. Wearing these earrings in homage to this creative aesthetic. But also on this cover is a wonderful title. You came up with a great, great title that perfectly reflects this book. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how you got there.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny because my mom and I have a joke. She would always come up with a name for a business before the business was written. I mean, she has created so many business names in her life, and maybe there's been 4 actual businesses that came out of it. And so again, the title came well before I had written anything. Although, look, when you're writing a book and you pitch a book, you write an outline and you do some sample things. So it wasn't that there was nothing, but I really hadn't engaged with it. And I was actually, well, back in the days where I exercised, but I was actually working out, and the girl in front of me had a pair of leggings on that said Upside on like the back, which I guess is maybe a fitness brand or something. And I was like looking at it and I was like, the upside of being down. And I was just like, and then the whole time it was in Lec Fit, so you jump on a trampoline, and I just kept going like upside of being, because I was just so afraid I was going to forget it. And I'm like, I think this is the title. I wish I could remember, because there were definitely other things tossed around, but yeah. And then as soon as I told everyone involved with the book, they're like, yeah, that's the one. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Great work. Nobody is probably surprised if they know your work with ban.do. They know that, copy is a beautiful part of your brain. And, the title is a pleasant surprise, but also not a surprise. In the book, you talk a lot about, obviously, mental health struggles, and you really pull back the curtain on what these different scenarios might look like that people struggle with all the time. So whether it's finding the right therapist or finding the right psychiatrist, then, and those are 2 very different experiences, or, the moment you realize you're not okay, like that's an experience that happens behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
You do a great job of illuminating those moments. And I'm wondering, for you, was it easy to talk about? Was it hard to talk about? Where did you fall in like actually being able to like write freely about these moments that are very hard?
I mean, by the looks of it, I feel like most people in this chat with us follow me on Instagram, so they probably know that the answer is it was very easy, and I was thrilled to be able to do it. And I'm also incredibly thrilled and grateful that it is easy for me. A lot of people have asked, like, what was the hardest chapter to write, and how, like, was it so painful writing this book? And I just didn't feel, I never felt that way. I'm so excited to be able to share these things. I've spent decades understanding mental health and like processing it and reading about it. And so I just felt very suited to be able to share that within the context of my life, and knowing already, given what I had shared publicly through Instagram, so many other people's experience mirrors mine, even if it's not exactly the same. And even this week, that has been one of the things that has come up the most, is like, this is me, and I sort of knew that going in. So that part was incredibly easy. maybe letting go of passages that I thought were funny or fun that weren't relevant to anyone was hard. So it was more like letting go than it was putting in. So that's what she said.
Well, we're grateful that it does come easily to you and that you're so willing to share. What would you hope that, somebody takes away from the book who might be going through a mental health journey of their own?
Yeah, well, Brittany said it at the beginning, like a big reason that I wrote it is to say that you're not alone. It's such an isolating experience because so much of it is lived inside of our own mind and our own body. But it is something that is really, in this day and age, familiar to everyone. Like if it's not something that you struggle with, it's something that someone within your family or within arm's reach at work or, they struggle with. And so I really, really hope to convey that. And to also say that like those struggles don't have to deter you from success. Like it doesn't have to be a limiting thing about your life. It can actually be like one of the most empowering things because I feel like it gives you depth and empathy that maybe you wouldn't have if you didn't have the struggles. And I guess the last thing I would say is like really just, I'm very passionate about building self-awareness and emotional intelligence in my community and the reader, because I feel like those have been two of the things that have helped me personally and professionally. And so to start to build that in other people, I think it helps navigate life. Forget about mental health issues, like all of it.
Yeah. How do you think that somebody could go about developing that emotional intelligence?
It's like anything that's great, it does take time. I would say after reading the book, getting curious about that. There's so much written about our minds and our personalities and why we are the way we are. I think that that's a really easy way to do it. I mean, obviously, finding someone to talk to, whether it's a therapist or a mentor or someone that can shed some light on your experience. I found that to be really helpful. Honestly, and now that we're all sort of sequestered, watching TV, watching movies, like sort of recognizing yourself in characters or understanding traits that you like or don't like is strangely incredibly helpful to, you're basically building your identity. Emotional intelligence is like having the ability to understand your own emotions and therefore understand the emotions of others. And that's like, to me, 70% of navigating the world. So yeah, those are a few ways I would say. There's probably more.
Well, and you heard her first, the book. Okay, so two of the themes that I think really stood out to me in the book were just the ability to maintain hope and this sort of omnipresent optimism or positivity, even when you're really struggling or really something pretty difficult in your life. And I think that a lot of people have been thinking about that in this moment in time. Like the elephant in the room is like, we're doing this virtually, right? Because the world around us is really struggling right now. Yeah. And I think a lot of people have been thinking this week about, how do I maintain hope? How do I maintain optimism, in a really tough time? And I'm wondering if you have any advice for us right now.
I should probably look at my highlighted copy of the book, but because I think some of it is so second nature to me. But I think at my core, I have a lot of faith, and I am convinced that everything is going to be okay, always, even in faced with situations like this. And to me, that doesn't mean like everything is going to be great. Like that would be a ridiculous way to feel right now. I think it's like being prepared to look tragedy and devastation in the eye and know that beyond that, there will be something great, whether it's something as big as a global pandemic or something, as small as like getting in a fender bender. I think that knowing inside of me, and also I've just had enough life experience to prove that is always, always, always the case. Sometimes the okay is not the okay that you wanted, but there is a gift and a lesson at the end. It's just that they're not always stacked right next to each other. So you have to have faith. For me, gratitude helps alleviate, if I was going to go into a negative place, like sort of redirecting. Humor, obviously, is a huge thing for me. But I think it's, man, I feel like I should, I feel like I said it so much more eloquently in the book. And I posted all this stuff the other day on optimism. Sometimes, it's funny in the particular circumstance we were in, I was talking to someone the other day and I'm like, I'm strangely peaceful and calm and feel okay. And I want to be able to help other people get there. And I know I'm here because of a lot of work. Like, I'm just a little bit ahead on that road because I've been really focused on it for the last few years. And I'm like, I'm having a hard time remembering what my first steps were. So hopefully those are helpful. Maybe when we do the Q&A, I don't want to get too distracted, but I can find something there.
Yeah. Well, you say it beautifully throughout the book. And like you said, you've put in the work, you've put in a lot of time developing that emotional intelligence and developing that real habit of being, optimistic, even if it is, something that comes pretty naturally to you. It also is like a muscle that you build up, and you do incredible work to do that. Okay. So one of my favorite parts or favorite things that you've put into the world, and it's in the book, it's mentioned in other places as well, is your emotional rating system. I think it's a perfect example of what you do best, which is make it easier for people to talk about their mental health. And you do such a good job of putting it in terms that people can wrap their head around and also feel okay saying out loud. Could you tell us a little bit more about your emotional rating system and also just explain how it came to be and the background behind it?
Yeah, totally. It's also the appendix of my book because I felt very passionate about it going in because I do think it's a useful tool. My mom will be happy to get the credit for really inventing this system. It's basically a numerical system to be able to rate your mood, is in a nutshell. And so in my 20s, when I had moved out to California and my family was in Florida, my mom would call me. I was struggling. I was very clearly struggling with my mental health and with everything. I had no job. I had no purpose, and I was improperly diagnosed, and I just was not in a great place. And obviously as a parent, she was very concerned, especially being so far away. But as a daughter, when your mom wants you to tell how you're feeling every day in detail, it's like, Mom, I don't want to talk. And so she was like, can you just give me a number today? Like, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And so we did that for quite some time, because it was easy for me to just say, I'm a 6, or I feel like a 9, and at this point we were sort of basing it on like depressed, not depressed. And then I eventually was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I have bipolar 2, which means you see a lot more. I just saw a rabbit outside. Sorry, I knew that was going to happen I'm trying not to look outside. It's bipolar 2 there's a lot more depression present than mania. So it appeared as such, but when I went to see the doctor and he wanted to make that final diagnosis, he also had me rate my moods. And then once we sort of figured out what my systems were, I was like, oh, I should change the way this rating system works, because for me, for this particular mood disorder, a 10 is too high. That means that I might be going into a hypomanic episode, and a 1 is devastatingly low, not anywhere you want to be. And so I sort of just set it up in the way that it's explained in the book, and I think in my Instagram highlights, is like 3 and under, like you have to ask for help immediately. Like if it's me, I'm in a very, very deep depression, like not one that can easily be adjusted. 4 to 6, you know, need to be paying attention to that. When you get over that, it's like, okay, you're feeling okay. And then I decided 7.8 because I get into decimals because I'm very in tune with how I feel in each moment. But I was like, 7.8 is the perfect. That's like, I feel good. I'm not elated, but there's like, everything is okay. And if you have a mood disorder, you know how valuable that could be. But, you know, my dad's a doctor and he was the first one to say, like, doctors always ask you to rate your pain 1 to 10. And so I think like the beauty of the system too is it's applicable to anxiety, and maybe you're just like 10 is the worst anxiety I've ever had. 1 is like no anxiety. So you can sort of adjust it to suit whatever it is that you're trying to rate and quickly identify. And then the other thing I would suggest is, especially now, I think the one thing you could do is figure out that whether it is anxiety or just the thoughts you're having or depression, and just each day, just note in the calendar what your number was, because you're going to have a great opportunity to look back in a month and see if there is anything cyclical about it. If you were depressed for a whole month, which is obviously something you need to look into. I just think like if I was going to give an upside, which I'll give 17 if you want, to this situation, I think that's one. We have some time to really introspect and, you know, pay attention to that. So.
Well, it's brilliant. We thank you for it. So you just shouted out your mom and dad. I think I saw some names.
I mean, unless they got bored and left, I don't know.
I don't know. But you shouted them out today. Also in the book, you talk about your relationship with your parents and kind of the role that they played. And I was wondering if you could give us a little behind the scenes into how that relationship sort of helped inform your journey with both your mental health journey, but also your creative journey, your life journey.
Totally. Well, I mean, like many of us, my parents were the 2 most impactful people on my life. And my relationship with both of them sort of continues to change and evolve. And the process of writing this book and reviewing our lives together and telling each other stories we had never told each other, was really interesting. So to have that perspective and then going back and revisiting my childhood, it was really quite interesting. But I think, most people have the luxury of knowing Dr. Jamie. He is a pretty lighthearted guy. He definitely leans into the humor piece of optimism. Tends to be quite a stable person, unless he's had too much sugar. Was really not when I was in a place of really struggling. That's really when my mom shined. Not to say, sorry, Dad, not to say that, to have someone that's just going to be very stable and consistent was incredibly helpful for me. But my mom was really the one that for all of those years was very willing to dig in and research and talk to me and help me. I will say that I was fortunate enough to have both of them together pay for my therapy, which is a huge luxury, and I recognize that. But so I think, I'm certainly a combination of both. My mom is highly creative. And I say in the book, she always told me dare to be different. And she certainly follows that, that rule and just sort of does whatever feels right to her and dresses how she would like to. And I don't think it was until I got older that I realized the impact that had on my life and my ability to not be swayed by, trend or opinion and just do what I want. So I got incredibly lucky in the parent department, and even within the challenges of those relationships, it's just given me, even to this day, it just continues to give me insight to myself And I mean, there's nothing better than that. So.
I love it. We love your stories of your parents. We love the dance videos you post. We love it all. So thank you for sharing those with us. So I think in about 10 minutes here, we'll take some questions from everyone submitting them. I can kind of see them coming through. But before we get there, I do want to ask you some questions about ban.do and your team there and what you've learned along the way. I mean, so many of us really admire your creative journey and admire your transparency and how winding your path has been. So I guess the first question I have about ban.do is I loved throughout the book, there were like little shout outs to your, team members or people you've brought on throughout the years. And I really appreciated that. We've all kind of grown to love the ban.do team and everything you've created. How did you first wrap your head around letting people into this baby that you built, and what have you learned about building a team and a creative team since that?
Yeah, I mean, letting people in initially was easy because we needed help, and there were people willing to work for. I don't even know if it was a legal wage. I mean, I assume it was, but I mean, that was, us in a very tiny office just trying to figure it out every day. So, the people that initially were drawn in were, I feel like, ended up being as emotionally attached to ban.do as I was, and Jamie, my co-founder. So for a long time, it felt very safe in that way, that we basically had a team of 5, give or take, for probably the first 5, maybe 6 years of the business. And so for anyone out there that has a small business, there's a real intimacy in that, and there's a shared responsibility. And I've certainly been the creative lead and visionary for that for a long time, but we were all just so in sync that it didn't feel vulnerable in any way. And I was just lucky people were willing to go along with what I was saying. I don't know if that makes them great or off kilter. But then as we, and I'd certainly go into detail on this in the book, but like as we started to grow and like actually become a company, we sold it year 4. Jamie needed to leave the state, and the only way to keep us alive was to sell it. And it wasn't like a huge conglomerate. We sold it to a privately owned company. So it didn't change in that all this money was infused and we became this giant corporation. It just like, they came in and added like structure and actual business to the creative cloud that we had created. And we saw some real growth over those years, just numbers doubling on numbers, which is not a common thing to happen, especially not when you're not taking on VC money and like you're just like bootstrapping it. It was amazing. And so we were all kind of high on that, I mean, it's a big deal. And so we started to grow and organize and create positions and an org chart. And I think in our office, we sort of have shared resources in Kentucky, but in our office, we maybe got close to 50, which was to go from, essentially went from around 10 to around 50 in like a 6-month period of time. And it ended up being, I don't want to say a bad decision because we learned so much from it, but it was pretty awful for me in a lot of ways. Like once it stopped being great, it started being the opposite of great. I didn't know how to run a team like that. I didn't know how to properly communicate my creativity in a way that made sense to people that aren't like somehow residing in my brain. And that was really hard. And to see people's relationship to like one of the most precious things in my life be essentially just a work relationship was heartbreaking for me. Like I was not prepared for that. I thought growth meant success and pleasantries, and it really did not. And so we, so we tapered back, and I feel like we've been getting to a place where it feels safe. And you asked about the creative part, bit by bit and step by step, I just started trusting other people and realizing that like, my vision that is specific to a picture or an email, an e-blast or a particular product, like, is not the only right way. It feels like that to me. It feels like that to all of us if we're creators. But the reality is there's hundreds of ways to be right. And once I sort of had proof of that, it helped me. And also, like, I knew that I wanted to go on and do things like this. And in order to do that, I was going to need people that I could trust. And I'm just really lucky to have that. And I think they're really doing an exceptional job, and my ability to let go over time has allowed ban.do to thrive and create things that I never would have concepted. So in the end, I think, like, if you want growth, it's important to know how to trust, but also know who to trust, and be prepared to deal with the fact that maybe you made some missteps in that along the way.
It's a great creative lesson, and just interesting to hear your perspective there. I think that, one of my additional favorite parts of this book is, and we'll just have like one more question before we start taking questions.
Yeah.
So if anyone has them, submit them. But one more question. One of my favorite parts of the book is you kind of provide some context and behind the scenes for some ban.do products that we've just grown to love over the years, right? So, my favorite ban.do product that I own is a big tote that says "I'm doing my best," because truly, that's what I'm doing. But you provide some context for the "I'm very busy" planners. You provide some context about how, maybe a pop star named Taylor Swift helped on the map, and then you also provide some context and a whole chapter actually on the like "I cry at work" line and also philosophy. And I'm wondering if you had some insight to share with us on like what you've learned about the ways that like emotions and work can coexist. I think a lot of people watching right now work in the DC area where things tend to be a little more buttoned up. So how can emotions and work sort of live together? What have you found?
Well, what I have found since I've come out as an advocate for crying at work, what I have found is it's a very triggering topic for a lot of people, which I didn't understand because the only company I've ever worked at is ban.do, and it's run as a very safe emotional environment, obviously because I'm me, and I didn't realize that there were rules against that. And so in a nutshell, I think emotions in the workplace are inevitable. We spend so much time there. I mean, obviously pre-pandemic, and we will be back post-pandemic, but we live our lives at work, and the idea that you have to lock your emotions at home and then go to work, and for many of us, especially in creative fields, pour your heart out into your work and then also cut off a whole part of your emotions just doesn't, like, I don't know how you thrive in that environment. But I think the misconception about the "I cry at work" and crying at work is that I'm somehow promoting people just emote all over the place, which if you want that, go to my Instagram stories. I think like at work, it's about how do we emote responsibly and recognize that we are going to have these emotions. And I think as leaders in companies, it's really important for us to create safe spaces for our employees to do that. On the flip side, because I'm sure a lot of people here are employees, it's important to challenge your leaders if they're reluctant to those conversations. Because here's the thing, here's another upside of what we're going through right now. Workplace is not going to be the same after this. And like the opportunities we have as people that want to change the workplace because we came in these really sort of strange, wiggly ways that we didn't go to business school and we don't have these, this is going to be our opportunity, and everyone is going to have a voice. And I think, I just feel like the things are going to dovetail into each other in a much nicer way. And again, I would just say with emotions across the board, and this is where emotional intelligence helps, I mean, understanding them helps you, in my mind, emote responsibly, and you know what's appropriate and what should be taken to your car and what is okay. And I think crying especially does not have to indicate sadness. It also indicates joy or just the need for a release of emotions. And I've cried a lot over the last week, and I'm not incredibly sad, but I'm feeling a lot of things. And I think it's important for us to all recognize that, like, the stigma against that just in society could use to just go away. So I'm going to advocate for that.
I agree. That was beautifully put. People are now contributing their favorite ban.do products in the chat. So check that out later if you want to smile.
Chill pills is my favorite too.
Yeah. Okay, so this actually lends well to our first question, which has a whole lot of upvotes here. But Stephanie wants to know, in your experience as a boss/employee, what steps can workplaces take to be good, inclusive spaces for employees with mental illnesses?
Well, I mean, I feel like you are correct. The last thing we talked about is a huge part of this. I think creating a safe space and not judging people for their emotions is a great way to start. What we've tried to do at ban.do, and listen, it's not always easy. You know, I mean, a business is a business, so it's sometimes hard to make it feel as safe as like when you're at your best friend's house. But I have felt like transparency and very open communication, just across all aspects of the business, allows for topics that are often stigmatized, like mental health, to feel a little bit safer. I mean, the employees at ban.do certainly have the luxury of having me as one of the leaders, and I make it incredibly okay. But I think, to me, talking about it in a way that is just conversational and okay, and if you're comfortable doing that, start, whether it's just to your HR or to a coworker, and let it sort of like trickle up. I feel like that's such a great way to do that. And then I think on the like really logistical side, there's still a lot of work to be done. Again, I think things that are going to now fast track, but like, how are you doing like mental health days and work from home when you need to, or flex hours because I'm having an anxiety attack for 4 hours this morning. And how you do that in a way that feels fair for everyone, because not everyone in every office struggles with that. And so what I have been given a glimpse at, although this is not a huge part of my role at ban.do, is that it's not as easy as flipping a switch. And I think that that's really important for employees of any company to understand, that if it were that easy, we'd certainly have it across the board. You know, I'm like, can we get a therapist on site every day? You know, so I try and be that for people. But I think there will be more to come. You know, I think these conversations are going to be opened up. So hopefully that's a helpful answer.
Yeah, this is kind of feels like it's never been more relevant, right?
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. Workplaces are going to change. They're going to have to. Because we're collectively going through such a tough moment right now. The next question, which is also highly upvoted, is a little bit lighter. It's from Carson, who wants to know, I'm going to make this question a little bigger. So the original question is, what, if anything, are you currently reading? Do you have any recommendations for quarantine reads? I want to know, what are you doing? What are you doing during this time? Because I think it can be hard to maybe read right now. What are you consuming? How about that?
I took myself out to the desert, so I am in relative solitude, which is a place that I actually really like that. I am reading a lot. I will say this week has been very strange because I've basically become my own social media manager, and my interaction with my phone and social media, my phone keeps going like screen time alert. And so I have been consuming a lot of that, but in a way that feels very fulfilling for me to like see everyone's response and reaction to the book. And but outside of that, you know, I'm rereading A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, which is like incredibly relevant now. If you have not read it, it's actually very exciting to read. The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, I think is his name, which is where the I did my best. That phrase actually inadvertently came from. I had read the book a long time ago, and then when I was rereading it recently, I was like, oh, he talks about that's like one of the principles, one of the agreements. Outside of that, I will say I watched Troop Zero last night, and I would highly recommend that. It is the sweetest movie and gave me a really good cry. But I think like mostly outside of reading those things and connecting with my phone, but also connecting with nature and talking to bunnies, I've really tried to meditate and be aware of my thoughts. And again, like I said earlier, like I'm just feeling incredibly peaceful. I don't fully understand why. I'm kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, but I'm trying to like remember on a cellular level what that feels like. And I think like that's something anyone can do. I feel like you have to carve out, even if it's 30 seconds of peace or joy each day during this. And then you create neural pathways that are like, okay, I remember how this is feeling, so you can call upon it at other times. So a little intense, but you asked me what I was reading and I gave you that.
I think that everybody's at kind of like their own place of processing what's going on, and we're going to all have those moments where we feel either very calm or very not. And, a lot of different things can help us. Books can help us. What you said, like the feeling of connectedness, even if it's a little more screen time than we're used to, that helps us. I mean, you put out a book, this week, so of course you are hopefully, receiving all of the praise that you deserve. The next question that I'm seeing here is from Nikki. She says, Jen, can you talk to how your mental health impacts your creativity and also vice versa? What works for you?
I will say it's kind of twofold. In a way, my mental illness contributed to my creativity, because during the time that I was either not properly diagnosed or not properly medicated, I would certainly slip into like hypomanic states. And one of the symptoms is rush of ideas. And so, which I identified as highly creative, but a lot of ideas were born out of me sort of feeling this, the high that you get with that sort of mood elevation. And in fact, and this is a common thing. So for you guys, anyone that's considering this, going on a mood stabilizer took a lot of that away from me. And it's a huge fear for people that struggle with these types of mood disorders and that are creative, that you're going to lose your creativity in the process. And what I found is that I've been able, with a stable mood, to be able to like refine my creativity and quickly get to those creative solutions or have ideas come up, because I'm not clouded by all of this instability. But I also feel like I can draw on some of the highs and lows of my mental illness. I think that's why it makes me want to like create a brand about joy, or put these things on bags, or I at one point took a bunch of Polaroids I took and wrote things on them. It was called Defaced, but it was based out of me being incredibly depressed, and I just wanted to like scribble on things, and people seem to really like that. So I think it's like, to me, it's about acceptance and embrace, regardless of if it's a negative or positive, because if you're a creative person, like, it will help you with flow. Resistance in any way is what clogs your creative flow. So anytime you feel that, you got to pivot, just in general. Yeah.
That's super helpful. Okay, next question here is from Tammy. She says, my God, we were all so clueless about mental health as we were growing up. If people are reading your book and thinking, oh, maybe that's what my friend is going through, what's the best way to help or broach that conversation?
Yeah, you know what? That's a very good question. To me, what I always say to people when they're like, how do I help or talk to my friend that's struggling? I'm so glad if anything you read in my book triggers a reaction where you're like, wait, I know someone like this, or better yet, this is me and I understand. But I think building your curiosity from there and like embracing it and learning a little bit more. What I have found is that, and I think this is why these conversations are not difficult for me, the understanding, like I just have a keen understanding of it. So it doesn't feel that different from any other ailment that you could have. It's, it's something that someone is struggling with, but when you understand it, it doesn't feel as intimidating. So I think like, I can't speak to everyone's friends or loved ones' personalities. I think you have to draw on your experience with that person to understand, like, do I send them a note? Do I sit them down? Do I just find a way to kind of like pop it into a conversation maybe when I see them struggling? But again, I think the best thing you can do is empower yourself with knowledge, and it will just organically make those conversations easier. Like you have my 100% guarantee on that.
Yeah. You and I talked a couple months ago for an interview on Girls Night In's website, and you did a beautiful job of also answering that question then about how does it become easier to talk about mental health? How do you broach those conversations and start to really make progress there and break the stigma a little bit? And so, we're always grateful that you.
Did I say the same thing? Or did I say something different?
I think that you said something pretty similar, but just like kind of what you were speaking to before about developing that emotional intelligence and self-awareness and, pushing past that initial phase of like talking about it, because when you talk about it, you can learn about it, right? So like you talk about it with somebody who has some insight to tell you that they wouldn't normally have if you hadn't just talked about it.
Yeah.
So I remember that really stuck out to me. Here's a question from Katie. She asks, do you regularly journal? If so, is there a method that you like, or would you just sit down and write? What frameworks work for you?
I don't regularly do anything. I am horrible at that. Maybe I've made it 3 months with any one thing that I was meant to do regularly outside of take medication. I journaled a lot during the book writing process because I found it very helpful. But I think for me and my personality type, it's to not give myself the responsibility of doing it every day, because I tend to get very avoidant of those types of responsibilities. I just try and get in tune with the times where I feel like I'm trying to process something up here, and it always works better if it's outside of myself, even if I read it a year later. So, and how I do that is, I just have an ongoing document on my computer that I just like put the date and go. A lot of times I'll just do a voice memo, or I'll put it in notes on my phone. Like I kind of allow the journaling to strike me, and then honor that when it happens, because I think it's really easy to be like, I'll just write that down later. But I think like for other people, that's why journals are made. It's like to sort of have that process of sitting down every day. And even if it's, one sentence, just sort of documenting it, I think that could be very helpful too. For me, that was just like too intimidating of a task to take on.
I agree. I also have trouble with that, keeping up the habit part.
Mm-hmm.
So tough. Okay, the next question here is similar to a couple that I'm seeing, so maybe we can loop them all together. But we've got questions from Sarah and also Jessica about what advice you would share on how to support someone who's either in a mental health crisis, or how to support someone who's having that I'm not okay moment.
Mm-hmm. I think the baseline thing to do is in a very confronting is not the right word, but like in as non-committal way as possible for them to make a commitment to you, to just say, I'm here if you need me. Like, I would start there. And again, like for me, that would never register. Like, I would think that's a wonderful thing to do, but I'm probably not going to ask you, but that's my own issue. You know, you can only help people as much as they want to be helped. That is a hard lesson that I learned through my marriage and through other relationships and friendships and work stuff. And like, the reality is you can't force help on people. So the best thing that you can do is say, I'm here for you if you need me. You know, beyond that, I think it goes back to what I was saying in speaking with your friend or dealing with it in a more just like everyday sort of way, like gauging the relationship and like understanding that to me is the most important part. But what I wouldn't do, which I think was hard for me a lot, is like offer up, like, you want to have some ice cream? You know, I mean, I think it's like, specifically with mental illness, it's like, that is so nice. That's not where I am right now, you know? So that's why I'm like, I almost think it can be triggering for people if you're offering something specific. It might not be what they feel like they need, but I think you know, presenting yourself as someone who's willing to help. And then listen, we have to keep our eyes on our friends that are struggling like that, because if it gets dire, then you maybe have to intervene. You know, I think maybe in a not a down, or, you know, where they're really being consumed with their mental illness, like encourage them to put in a support plan, because it's really hard to get that when you're in it, you know? And so I think, like, look out for your friends. There's certainly a point where you should intercede, but I wouldn't start with that.
Great advice. We've got about 2 minutes, so I think we can get through 2 questions that are a little like,
okay.
I do. So one question here from Meredith says, was there anything that you had to cut from the book that was really hard for you to not have included? If so, can you share that story with us and explain why maybe it didn't make the book?
You know, I wanted to answer that question, but here's the funny thing about me. I've got so incredibly good about letting go that I can't remember and there were like 3,000 word chunks being pulled out because I wrote twice as many words as what was really appropriate. So I think it really was just a lesson in attachment and how appropriate that needs to be. So I was thinking about that the other day, and I'm like, I was so mad about something, I can't even remember what the passage was at this point. So it's a good indication that letting go actually is the easiest way to peace.
A good lesson to learn. The last question I think we have time for is from Jessica, who wants to know, once we get through this moment in time, will there be a book tour? Will there be other events?
I mean, I hope so. You know, it's like it was initially like, let's just postpone it, because there was no way half the reason I wrote the book was for the book tour. Like, I'm so obsessed with the idea of meeting this many people. You know, I think what has happened to us all very quickly is the ability to even come close to predicting the future has like completely been leveled. So for me, in my dream scenario, we're all well enough and society is well enough that I could do that as soon as possible. But I can't say for sure, but if the door cracks open, I'm walking through it. And then if not, we'll wait for the paperback, or we'll wait for the next book. No one's asked me to write that yet. Well, actually, a couple of people on Instagram did, but I'm going to do it anyways. So we will find our time.
We'll stay tuned. Well, we hope that the book tour is able to happen. We're thinking about so many authors and bookstores right now that are really having to adapt the plan. And, you know, like you said, so many authors do sort of like live for that book tour moment, that chance to connect with people in real life. In the chat right now, Ellen said, my dream is to meet you in person. So please take away from this that people really are excited to meet you, are excited to read this book. And this has been so good.
I know. Thank you for your questions. They were so good. and the questions from everyone. I mean, I can't believe you asked me what's the pattern on your dress before we got on here, but I can't believe no one was curious that it's Jello.
Someone gave a shout out and said Jello. I saw.
Okay. Yeah. Anyways, thank you for your thoughtful questions and allowing me to ramble a little bit. And thank you for everyone that stuck with it. It seemed like everybody just hung in there the whole time. I was like trying not to look at the number.
Everyone stuck with us, and hopefully they're buying the book because it's a really good one, a treat to us all. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Jen. Thank you so much, Tyler. I think this was the exact conversation everybody needed right now. I can see it in the chat. This was incredible. Everybody, please go support Jen. Buy the book with the green button below. Check out girlsnightinclub.com. We have lots of other streamed events coming up, so check politics-prose.com for those. And Jen, I'm going to holler at you for that paperback tour.
Okay, great. I mean, I was like, I think I have the plane tickets. I could probably just go to these places. And we'll just figure it out. So it will most likely happen.
Yeah, we'll get you there somewhere. We'll make all these wonderful people very happy somehow.
Gotta give the people what they want.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you guys so much. Everyone, please stay safe, stay well, keep reading, and take care of yourselves.
I don't know what that is.